Hey everyone, welcome to another interesting conversation on G News. Today we are joined by Priyanka Radhakrishnan, who is Labour's spokesperson for conservation. Hey Priyanka, welcome back to G News.
Hi Gerard, thanks for having me on again.
You're most welcome. With 4 months to go before a general election and national polling down in the 20s, National have now suddenly removed a for sale and disposal clause from their Conservation Amendment Bill due to a massive groundswell of opposition. Do you think National are just trying to get rid of that groundswell of opposition to their amendment bill rather than the end game that they might be playing for here?
Look, the optimist in me is happy that they have removed this. They've taken sale and exchange of conservation land, public conservation land, off the table for now. But the cynic in me feels that it's to take the heat out of the absolute viral backlash that they have received online and, people writing in, presumably to the minister as well. I know I've received a huge amount of correspondence on this and that a number of people in the tens of thousands have submitted to the select committee as well. So part of me feels that they might just be taking the heat out of this. I hope not, but we'll see. The first point I'll make on that, though, is that they consulted on this publicly back in 2024. And there was a huge amount of opposition. There was, a majority of those who submitted opposed the sale and exchange of public conservation land back then, 2 years ago. They didn't listen. They put it into their Conservation Amendment Bill, and now they've received this viral backlash, and they seem surprised by it, which to me is odd. Anyway, they've taken it out for now. That's good. However, there is another bit of this, which is Section 6EA, that fundamentally changes the purpose of the Department of Conservation. It's a major shift away from their primary motivation, which for the past 40 years under the current Conservation Act has been to protect biodiversity and fight for conservation land and keep it in public ownership. Now, this sneaky, egregious section was not consulted on back in 24. It snuck in at Cabinet because of Shane Jones. So I'm calling it the Shane Jones Clause. And that allows, or rather, that changes DOC's function and purpose and explicitly asks the department to focus on economic development on all public conservation land to the greatest extent practicable. That is a massive shift. And that is still in there.
Yeah, and I think that's what everybody's up in arms about because they know that's still in there. And they're even asking, well, why did National never see this level of opposition coming when, they keep putting these kind of Shane Jones clauses into their laws?
Yeah, honestly, a beggar's belief. I don't know how they didn't see this coming. It's similar in terms of pattern to the 11th hour amendment that they put in for the Hauraki Gulf Marine Protection Bill, which again was at the behest of New Zealand First and Shane Jones specifically. Now, at the EDS conference that we were all at yesterday, and that's where Minister Potaka made his announcement to remove the sale in exchange of public conservation land. Shout out also to everyone who has shared this on social media over the last few days and the ENGOs that have been pushing back very strongly on this. It is a win for the people, I think, frankly. Anyway, Minister Potaka made this announcement at the EDS conference yesterday. Straight after him was Shane Jones speaking on the same panel that the three of us were on. And he reinforced the fact that at the cabinet table, they want to keep Section 6EA in. They will campaign on it. And if they get elected post-November this year, that they will put up. He wants to sell 50% of conservation land. He's been very clear about that. So this is still worrying.
And Tama Potaka appeared to be saying that, well, on some level, everyone else had made some big mistake and failed to interpret what he really intended, which was about just some little bits and bobs. But the words that were used by National in their bill, it wouldn't have passed a kind of a legal sniff test if that was all they were trying to limit the disposal of land to. Shouldn't Potaka be saying something like New Zealanders got it right rather than New Zealanders got it wrong? And why can't National make much more tightly defined law?
Yeah, look, I don't think national ministers are very good at apologies, frankly. And that's probably the closest that we can see one get to an apology, sadly. Why can't they make better laws? I don't know. It's difficult to understand, particularly because he had started, he had a public consultation document that went out to the public in 2024. So he's had 2 years to work on this and to come up with better law. I think it boils down to the negotiations that they have done to get into power. They have basically, every time Shane Jones and New Zealand First comes up with this new way to ruin the environment, they just roll over and say yes. And that is, to me, ultimately weak leadership.
Now, a lot of people are sort of wondering why this government doesn't just kill this bill entirely, and why are they hanging on to this emphasis that you mentioned about economic development? That seems to be the top of the pyramid instead of sort of somewhere underneath conservation. What do you make of the need for an amendment to the law in conservation at the moment anyway?
The Conservation Act is old. It is about 40 years old. Things have moved on since then. There is some stuff in the bill that isn't too bad, things like streamlining concessions processes and things like that. So I do think that the bill or the act does need to be looked at. But what they've come up with, and this seems to again be a pattern with the current government, they do a bunch of things that sound okay, and then they slip in all these things that are egregious and hope no one notices. And that's the same with this particular piece of legislation. There's some stuff that's all right, charging, tourists who come in a bit more to go to particular tourist hotspots. I can live with that. Streamlining concessions, good thing to do, frankly. But reversing the balance from protecting biodiversity and nature towards economic development on all conservation land, bad. Watering down treaty clauses, bad. Looking at 60% of public conservation land that can be sold or exchanged, very bad. So there you go. Some good stuff, does need some change, but some really, really bad stuff.
Yeah, they've really kind of tried to flip the values around on their head there and just make economic development more important, it looks like, to many people. Regarding giving effect to the treaty, Forest and Bird have said that under the new parameters, decision makers are primarily required to invite comments from relevant Maori groups and simply consider those comments and their impacts rather than actively uphold any treaty principles in the final outcomes. And people have said, well, that's not partnership. It diminishes the role of tangata whenua in decisions about conservation land and provides for less assurance that Maori voices will meaningfully influence any outcomes. So why do you think National are quite bent on this weakening of the treaty clauses across the law at the moment and in this particular amendment as well?
Yeah, I think Forest and Bird is correct. Firstly, with this particular bill, I think it's Section 4 that remains in the Conservation Act, and Minister Potaka has been at pains to point to that to say that nothing's changing. But they're introducing a new section, which basically will water down the impact of that original section. And they move away from a partnership model, away from exactly what you said, where Māori aspirations can influence decision-making. They're shifting from that to just a tick box exercise where they tick a bunch of boxes to say that they've invited views, they've considered views, but there's no requirement to actually act in the best interests of those Māori aspirations or in partnership, frankly. So it is an absolute watering down that they're proposing through the Conservation Amendment Bill. That remains in there, so that is something that people should be aware of as they submit to Select Committee as well. This fits within, again, a broader pattern of this government consistently eroding Māori rights. We've seen that with the, horrendous treaty principles bill that they supported to Select Committee. They said that they weren't going to support it right through to the end, to third reading, but they did a fair bit of damage in even allowing that bill to be introduced and get to Select Committee. The disestablishment of Te Ake Whaiora, the Māori Health Authority, And we've seen a systematic assault on Maori rights and treaty principles across the board. So I'm not terribly surprised by this. Again, they're doing it in a very sneaky way, but it's something that people should absolutely point out.
Absolutely. So if we do step back and talk about those patterns, when it comes to National's record on conservation over the past term, could you step us through or just explain in summary what kind of things have happened under National since they took power?
Yeah, I mean, even if I were to focus that just on the conservation portfolio, there's a fair bit to talk about. Firstly, of course, DOC is severely underfunded under this government. They've stripped away, millions from the Department of Conservation, which already has a huge amount on their plate. I put it to the audience at the conference yesterday and to Minister Potaka that my back of the envelope calculations shows that they've stripped 194 million from DOC. He didn't say anything to that, so I'm going to go with that figure. That's the figure that I've calculated across 3 budgets that this government has been in office. And with part of that, they have replaced some of that funding with the international visitor levy. So they've increased that. It was a levy that Labour and government brought into play. They've increased it from $30 to $100. When we brought it in, that funding was always meant to be over and above the government's responsibility to fund DOC, well, or at least reasonably. And it was never meant to replace government funding. It was meant to offset the impact of increased tourism on conservation, on biodiversity, on public conservation land. This government, again, rather sneakily, has decided to cut back their contributions or their funding to DOC and to replace some of that with the visitor levy. And some of it, bizarrely, has even gone towards tourist promotion. So there was a $41.9 million price tag on a tourism promotion marketing campaign. This is money that's supposed to offset the impact of tourism on conservation, and they're using it to increase tourism. It's just a beggar's belief. So firstly, that is a travesty, and DOC is struggling. Second, these 11th hour insertions. So we're seeing it now with the Conservation Amendment Bill. We saw it with the Haraki Gulf Marine Protection Now Act. But, you'll hear Minister Potaka taking a fair bit of credit for that piece of work. He did nothing except choose not to axe it entirely. And all he's done under his watch is to water it down and allow for Shane Jones's 11th hour amendment that allows some commercial fishing in a high protection area. He's done absolutely nothing to advance marine protection, an area that we need to do a lot better. People forget just, we protect 30% of our land, and the amount comparatively for oceans is something like 3% or something. And I think that's probably generous. So we need to do a lot better there. Jobs for nature. Everywhere I go across Aotearoa, New Zealand, when I speak to those at the flax routes who are doing the work in conservation, they tell me what a massive difference Jobs for Nature funding made to their organisation, to their ability to increase their reach, to manage volunteers better, to get into, pest control and advance our predator-free goal. Nationals acts that as well and move that money back to the centre also. Predator-free limited gone, overnight as of budget 2025. So the disestablishment of the Ministry for the Environment more recently as well. That's not something they campaigned on. And they don't seem to understand that absolving it into a mega ministry risks losing focus on the natural environment. So, and all they've achieved really, we were in committee stage on Wednesday, earlier this week, either Tuesday or Wednesday. The days are kind of blurring in my mind now. But we are at committee stage of the Game Animal Council Herds of Special Interest Amendment Bill, where that bill then reduces protections in national parks, areas with the highest level of protection in New Zealand, to allow for the maintenance of specific herds of deer that ultimately destroy our understory and forests. So, their track record is pretty woeful, frankly.
It really is. I mean, thanks for that. I hope everyone heard that. In summary, it's been pretty bad. So what happens next with this Conservation Amendment Bill? And what what should people do about it from here on in?
So submissions are still open. They're open till the 2nd of July, although Minister Potaka said yesterday that he's planning to write to the Environment Select Committee. I'm a member on that Select Committee. He said that he's going to write to the Select Committee to extend the submission periods for a week. So hopefully that happens, but for now, the deadline is still 2nd July. It's still open. Get your submissions in. There is still Section 6EA that is egregious. Treaty clauses. I know that some ENGOs have an issue with the way that the visitor amenities part of that bill, allowing for visitor amenities like, restaurants and toilet blocks on conservation land. There's an issue with that as well. So check out the work that Forest and Bird, Greenpeace and others are doing on this, and submit. Get your submissions in. It is a full Select Committee process, so the bill will not pass before the election unless something changes dramatically from here on. We will be looking to see that Section 6EA is removed as well, and that the treaty clauses are significantly strengthened before we decide what we do with this bill. But when I say we, I mean Labour.
Thank you. So speaking of Labour, how's the campaign going out there? What are you hearing in the communities, and how are things feeling right now?
Yeah, look, cautiously optimistic. We've been steadily sort of going up in the polls over the last 6-7 months or so, which is establishes a bit of a trend. However, we are still not where we want to be, so it'll be a hard slog for the next 4 months before the election. We'll be out there. We've been listening to what New Zealanders want to tell us since the 23 election. Still, cost of living is top of mind for nearly everyone I speak to. All of the surveys that, I have seen tell me that cost of living is a massive issue. People are struggling with just the basics. So food, fuel, being able to get around, petrol costs, fuel costs, power is what I meant to say. All of that is a struggle for so many people. Food insecurity. 1 in 3 households have experienced food insecurity in the last year. If a household is a disabled person, that figure goes up to 82%. 82% of households with a disabled person have experienced food insecurity in the last 1 year, and that's pretty telling. Food banks are telling me that largely, large percentage, I think it was 30 or 40% of people who come in for food parcels are doing so for the first time and are working. So we need to ensure that we create jobs and decent jobs that pay decent wages. Also things like going to the doctor, being able to buy a house, all of that is also becoming quite challenging for a larger section of our population. And that's largely what I'm hearing. Plus, of course, I've had people come to my street corners to talk about the Conservation Amendment Bill. So that is also generating a fair bit of concern.
Excellent. So finally, if you've got any messages you'd like to convey to our audience about this Conservation Amendment Bill and the upcoming election, go for it.
So on the Conservation Amendment Bill, I will just reiterate my ask that people do submit to the Select Committee. And make sure that they're very clear about the aspects of the bill that they support, if they support any part of it, and which bits they don't support. Are they wanting us to finesse the bits that they don't support or to completely kill the bill? Those sorts of arguments are really useful at Select Committee. If they have particular concerns about specific areas or, they've worked in conservation, they've got a particular viewpoint informed by research work they've done out in the field, always useful to include that for us as well. Secondly, on the election more broadly, my number one message now is to enroll. Please make sure that your details are updated. If you've moved house since 2023, please ensure that you are enrolled to vote. National has changed the law such that you cannot both enroll and vote in the advance voting period. So by mid-September, to be very safe, please make sure you are enrolled, and then please make sure that you do vote. The stakes are really high at this year's election. So just, if I were to give you a quick example of the conference panel that I was part of at the EDS conference, the Environmental Defence Society conference yesterday, This is a room full of industry partners, local government people, researchers, academics, activists, people who care deeply about our stunning landscapes, our unique biodiversity and ecosystems across the country. And when you have a senior minister in the current government, Shane Jones, stand up and say very clearly that we need to sell 50% of our conservation land, which means we have one of the highest rates of threatened indigenous species in the world. 4,000 of our unique species found nowhere else in the world are threatened with extinction. Selling off 50% of our conservation land puts further species at risk of extinction. We can't afford to do that. Shane Jones has been very clear. New Zealand First will go with national, is what they've said at the election. They will sell, if they get back in, they will sell half of our public conservation lands, and they will engineer or support an absolute assault on our conservation lands through extractive industries and more. The stakes are very high, whether that's your interest or the assault on the rights of disabled people, or the fact that this is a government that campaigned on easing the cost of living and have actively made it worse by blowing billions on one tobacco company and property speculators. Please enroll. Use your vote wisely. And I would say vote Labour, because that is the surest fire way to change this government.
Priyanka Radhakrishnan, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really valuable for us all to hear you talk from Labour's point of view about the Conservation Amendment Bill, and we look forward to having you back here again before the election.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the work that you're doing to help people stay informed as well.
Welcome to G News, the good news.
Yeah, right.